We've got to talk about this, guys. Today is January 6th. 1 year ago today, I don't know if we can call this an anniversary. I asked this question in the newsletter today. Like, an anniversary seems to be something like jovial, something nice, something positive that we celebrate, right? It's the anniversary of our wedding. It's a birthday anniversary, whatever it is, right? But January 6th, we had this riot at the Capitol. We had hundreds of people who broke into the Capitol building. You had thousands more who were outside peacefully protesting. That to me, it's emblematic of a nation divided right now. But of course, both political parties are using this thing as a political football to their own advantage or disadvantage. Democrats are trying to hang their hats on this right now as one thing for you to vote for because God knows their agenda has failed. Democrats have governed awfully, terribly, right? They run every member. They have every seat in Congress. I mean, they have every house in Congress, right? They have the House of Representatives, the Senate, and the White House. And this is the governing that they've provided.
Well, yeah, because remember what they said when they had to win the Georgia runoff, because if they did, they wouldn't need Republicans. They'd be able to pass everything they wanted. It was going to be sunshine, rainbows, $2,000 checks were going to go out. It was like this was going to be the best thing that ever happened to the American people. Yeah.
Yeah, what happened to that, right? What exactly happened to that? Well, it didn't happen. And Republicans are equally as bad, right? Both parties are garbage. So they're using this as a political football right now. But Karl Rove is trending today, former right-hand man to George W. Bush, presidential advisor to George W. Bush. Very smart individual. He's a very learned individual, very, very intelligent. And Republicans always lean on him for trends in the Republican Party. I once had dinner with Karl Rove where he brought a book this thick that showed all of the different congressional districts and exactly like how he thought they were going to vote in certain, like the guy is a studied, learned person. But he's under fire this morning from Republicans for his opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal that he wrote this morning called Republicans' January 6th Responsibility. So there are some key pieces of this that I wanted to highlight for you today from Karl Rove. And he says, we are in an acrimonious period of partisan tribalism, and we have been for some time. Both parties are guilty of overwrought denunciations of their political opponents. He said, my criticisms are often aimed at Democrats. But on the anniversary of January 6th, I'm addressing squarely those Republicans who for a year have excused the actions of the rioters who stormed the Capitol, disrupted Congress as it received the Electoral College's results, and violently attempted to overturn the election. He says that these Republicans are apologists. And he says they're apologizing for those who stormed the Capitol. He's saying they're just they're labeling them as innocent patriots. They were just tourists who were visiting the seat of the national government to petition their elected representatives peacefully. We're told that these harmless, ordinary Americans are being persecuted as political prisoners. And he goes on to talk about where the leaders of this group were intent on committing violence. Some planned to do so for weeks. Many wore tactical gear. Some came armed with chemical agents, flagpoles.
Probably the feds.
Yeah, we don't. Batons, sticks. They broke through barricades, assaulted approximately 140 police officers, in some cases with the officers' own shield or gear. They smashed doors, windows, illegally entered the Capitol, ransacked offices, searched for leaders of Congress, and made dire threats about what would happen if they found them. That is all true.
Well, that is all true. Why isn't he saying anything about the sticks they were handed from the basement window? Like, nobody talks about that. Do you remember that video? Like, why has that never been talked about?
Well, I mean, it's been talked about here on our show. I think, and we can come back and sort of conflate these issues a little bit. I mean, I think one issue is that there were people who posted on their social media ahead of time that they were going to come to Washington. They wanted to hold these leaders accountable. They were stocking up on different tactical gear with that sole purpose. So I think he's talking about those specific people, right? These people that said they wanted to find Nancy Pelosi and find these other Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Mike Pence and wanted to hang said person on the Capitol lawn. Those people, I think he's specifically talking about, right? And so this is a discussion that he's made. This is an argument that he's making, Karl Rove. He said that more than 725 people have been charged so far, and law enforcement is searching for hundreds more suspects who appear in videos or social media. Some recorded attacking police officers. At least 163 people have pled guilty. 71 have been sentenced. Only one defendant's charges have been dismissed. Many of the most serious trials have yet to be held as lawyers prepare defenses or negotiate plea deals. And he asks this thought-provoking question, which is, here's a thought experiment. What if, on the other hand, the other side had done it? What if in early January 2017, Democrats, similarly attired and armed, had stormed the Capitol and attempted to keep Congress from receiving the Electoral College results for the 2016 presidential election? What if Democrats, he writes, claimed that Donald Trump's razor-thin victories in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin resulted from extensive voter fraud and should be rejected, despite having failed to establish in a single court that extensive fraud had actually occurred? Well, what if these Democrats breached the Capitol defenses, threatened violence against Republican Speaker Paul Ryan at the time and Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell? What if they insisted that his role as Senate President, then Vice President Joe Biden, had been the sole authority to seat Hillary Clinton and thereby hand her the presidency? If this happened, would some of my fellow Republicans have accepted it as merely a protest? Would they have called them patriots those who charge with violent acts against our country, its laws and constitution? Would they have accepted such extra legal means to change the outcome of a presidential election? He writes, no, they would not. I am certain of that. So basically, he says to move beyond January 6th, we must put country ahead of party. Democrats, that means resisting their leadership's petty habit of aggravating partisan fault lines by indiscriminately condemning all who came to Washington that day. And we Republicans have a heavier burden. He says, I've been a Republican my entire life, writes Karl Rove. He says, and believe in what Republican Party stands for at its best, has represented for decades. There can be no soft peddling what happened and no absolution for those who planned, encouraged, and aided the attempt to overthrow our democracy. Love of country demands nothing less. That's true patriotism. So, interesting thoughts by Karl Rove on his opinion piece. That's why it's trending today. And that the GOP has to condemn the riot and those who refuse to acknowledge it. But, it is interesting to see Merrick Garland, though, come out and say that instigators, those people who weren't even there that day, people who, I don't know, went on social media or told other people to go to the Capitol, would also face prosecution along with pro-Trump rioters. And we're learning that President Biden today is going to come out and give a speech where he is going to eviscerate Trump and say that he is totally to blame for what happened on January 6th, that he was responsible for it. So talk about trying to heal the nation right now. And, there's so much hypocrisy to go around in this whole argument, where if you want to try to pull it apart and dissect little pieces of it, for instance, what about the bomber, the placed lead pipes? Where's that? There's no discussion of that. There's no discussion of that. No mention of that. No manhunt for that guy.
Well,
where's this guy been?
A lot of people do, this is where I do defend Trump. I did not see anything him calling for violence that day. Nothing he said actually called for it. And it's you cannot, if you say something, if we were to say something on this show, we say a certain thing, some people are going to take it one way, some people are going to take it another way. Some people take things that people say to a different degree and act out in a way that they maybe didn't plan. Did he not stop it soon enough after he knew it was happening? Possibly. Okay, that's where this could be the case. However, there were questions about what happened in the election. There were questions. People should have been looking into this more, because that's the thing. If our democracy is at all threatened, this happens in other countries all the time. People protest. People bring sticks. People do things when things like this happen. So they could have been way more transparent from the beginning with everything that was going on, instead of just blowing everybody off and saying there's nothing to see here, nothing to see here. There should have been third-party investigations from people that were not, politicized or whatever. There could have been so many other things that could have made this a better situation. And the fact that, these people went into the Capitol, if they don't start listening to the people, the Congress and the senators, this is going to happen again, and it's going to be worse.
Well, on the election side, you had Republican secretaries of state, you had Republican election commissions, you had Trump elected or Trump appointed judges who looked at quote unquote voter fraud in Arizona and Michigan and all sorts of other places. Nothing, right? And so that had been adjudicated in the courts. That's what Karl Rove is saying here. So there are systems in place to deal with that, right? I mean, yes, we have an election system where you have all sorts of different election, counties. You have different, election boards. So it's not a federal election system that's actually analyzing. It's state by state by state, county by county by county, election system by election system. And so all of these things have been adjudicated. And so I think that's what Karl Rove is saying here. I'm not going to put words in his mouth. Again, this is his opinion piece. But we absolutely should shine a light on all of these things. And what I am always troubled by is like the picking and choosing of what we shine a light on, right? For political purposes. That's what I'm getting to here is we pick and choose what we choose to, like what we want to get answers about.
Well, and that's
and
why
we conveniently ignore the rest.
And that's why I argue that it should be like we need some kind of investigate. Like I said, there's no investigative journalists anymore. If one single person saw any a bit, like let's say it absolutely was not enough to overturn the election. I understand that it probably wasn't, but if there was any indication that it had happened, there should be investigators, not the states, not the people that can ultimately decide who wins or loses because it's all politicized. An independent party to go in and just look at it. But we don't have those anymore. Like back in the day, you would have had the people from 2020 or something like that, like on the scene investigating. Hey, we're going to look into this. We need all this data. We need to look into this and that. And that just doesn't happen anymore. We don't have that. So it's like we're putting all of our faith in what these politicians' outcome, what they say it is. And we know that behind the scenes, these deals are made and this deal's made. If you say this, you get this deal. So it's like we just don't have anybody that does the work for us anymore so that we absolutely know positively that there was nothing sinister going on with our election.
Merrick Garland says that the January 6th instigators could face prosecution. Here's what he had to say yesterday in this speech on the eve of January 6th. Here's what he had to say.
The Justice Department remains committed to holding all January 6 perpetrators at any level accountable under law, whether they were present that day or were otherwise criminally responsible for the assault on our democracy. We will follow the facts wherever they lead.
Okay. You'll follow the facts wherever they lead. And as I brought up earlier, what about as Tucker mentioned last night, and I don't agree with Tucker on everything at all, but I think he made a very important point about who we pick to go after, right, in certain situations. So we put out this massive manhunt for people that were there taking pictures and other things like that. But then there are all sorts of other crimes in this United States that we turn a blind eye to and choose to ignore. But he specifically talked about the pipe bomber. And what about this guy?
Garland made no mention at all of the pipe bomber. Remember there's the pipe bomber right there. The pipe bomber of January 6th. Maybe it was January 5th, actually. We're observing the anniversary of the pipe bomber right now. That individual was caught, we would say man, but we don't want to get too specific in the current environment. That person was caught on surveillance tape. The pipe bomber was on several phones, or one phone several times. That's all traceable. Where's that person? Merrick Garland didn't even mention it.
Yeah, so someone lays a pipe bomb at the nation's capital or at the DNC headquarters or the RNC headquarters. Where is the discussion about that? Why isn't there this nationwide manhunt, the resources in place to go after those people?
Well,
the picking and choosing of resources.
Where's the person going out? Like those two FBI guys, you could clearly see their face, and they're not even on any of these lists to be they're like nowhere to be seen. These feds. So in my opinion, like if you have two feds there, then that completely, if you have two feds leading people in, you have the police moving barriers, that completely just completely throws all of this stuff out the window, because if they were there, they were helping this happen. So how can the feds help it happen and then try and find the people and persecute the people who did it? That makes zero sense to me.
Well, it's a great question. And we don't, again, we don't know how widespread that was, like this involvement by the feds. Was it 3 people? Was it 2 people? We know that there were certain Capitol Police officers who were let go. Many more quit. Many more Capitol Police quit. But I think what gets lost in this argument about the feds, and I think what gets lost in this, like in maybe just the Tucker focusing on this pipe bomber, is the almost 200 people who broke through, smashed windows, went through the Capitol, trashed the place, were trying to hunt down members of Congress, and saying that they were going to try to get Mike Pence and hang him on the Capitol steps, go after Nancy Pelosi, go after all of these other members of Congress. So I think that gets lost in all of this. And there's just like the sugar coating that I see from some of the conservative media. And then there's this political football politicization of this entire thing. Vote for Democrats because, you can't trust Republicans. And they're all tied to Trump, and they were all here to overturn and destroy our country, when that's not true either. There were thousands of people there that were protesting peacefully about an election they thought was wrong, supporting a leader that they were upset had lost.
Well, and that's the thing.
And they were protesting peacefully. So they conflate all of these stories.
Yeah, and if you look at for me, look at all the crimes that have happened in the past that the feds have been, we always find out the feds were involved somehow. The feds were manipulating these kids to do this crime. The feds were involved in getting this person to do this crime. They're involved in almost all of this stuff, and if they're involved in any way, shape, or form, I think it undermines the whole thing. Because we don't know how many of them were there. They could have been the ones that built the gallows. They could have been the ones, like this whole thing where we just saw that march of those people with shields and all that just came out. For me, when I see that stuff now, my mind just goes to feds. Because when we saw that little, what was that protest that was like a remembrance of January 6th, and they were trying to get everybody to show up. Well, nobody showed up, but there's pictures, and it was all feds. Everybody who was there were federal agents. Yeah. They're heavily involved in this stuff, and it's why does that all get overlooked? Why is nobody like I said, where are the investigative journalists finding out how many feds were involved? How real was this situation? We don't need Congress doing it with their little, cabinet or whatever they got together, their little thing to go and look into it. Because what are they going to do? They're not going to go look at evidence. They're not going to go be detectives. We need journalists to be in there and do real detective work to find out what happened if we really want to know. Well,
here's a real journalist, Tom O'Neill. Now, I just finished reading his book a few months ago. I encourage all of you to read it. It's very dense, but he spent 20 years of his life as a journalist reporting on this story. 20-year story about the Charles Manson, the involvement of the CIA, and so in the chat right now, what I'm seeing somebody in the chat say is, we know the feds. I think Fred Meyer says, we know the feds have a history of being involved with terrorism plots in the United States. Yes. Yes.
Every single one.
TNT New Life says, I believe the FBI and the CIA are parts of these hate groups. Two black men found hung in public places. The FBI says it's suicide. Who commits suicide in the woods and in a public street? I don't know that, but what I'm saying is that there is a history of this, and it's right here. You can read about it. Charles Manson, the CIA, the secret history of the 1960s. It's an excellent piece of journalism. He's an excellent reporter. He spent 20 years of his life, and a gumshoe reporter. I mean, literally getting gum on his shoe, going door to door, speaking to sources, people who were actually involved with it. Not just people hanging out in a newsroom in CNN, an actual journalist sleeping in his car to get the answers. And yes, the CIA and the FBI, they were actively involved in these groups. They infiltrated these groups. They were a part of these groups. And in fact, in some instances, they fomented violence on purpose. So there's a long history here of this.
Well, and look what happens, though. Here's what happens. You have people like Julian Assange who break these stories, who shine a light on this stuff, and who ends up being the bad guy? It's the journalist. It's the person that's shining the light on the fact that this, they probably hate that guy that wrote that book. Because,
yeah, right.
I mean, because you can't. Anybody who tries, and that's what we don't have. We don't have fearless journalists anymore that are willing to put we do, but they get marginalized because they're a blogger or they're on YouTube. I don't listen to I don't get any of my information from somebody on YouTube. That's ridiculous. I don't get my information from podcasters. That's ridiculous. Right. But those are the only investigators that exist anymore.
Well, look, I spent 20 years in the mainstream media, right? I was a news anchor and a journalist for 20 years in the mainstream media. I worked for CBS, NBC, Fox. I was there. I worked in those places.
Belly of the
in
beast.
those in the belly of the beast, you know, and you know, I have a lot of great sources, right? And I have a lot of great friends that are excellent journalists and who have moved around from different newsrooms to different newsrooms, but they've been excellent journalists, excellent writers. And I run a YouTube channel. And so we cover these stories here on this show that you're not going to see in the mainstream media. We cover it and we try to provide context for it. And we're not taking a side on this. I mean, I'm trying to give you both sides of this, which is what Karl Rove is saying on this, what Tucker was saying on this, what the police are saying on this, what people who were on the ground actually involved in these riots were saying, who were there watching all of this unfold. So all different angles of this.